Have you ever walked into a place where you were ready to be respected, only to be treated as if you didn't belong? Imagine stepping into a luxury showroom, confident and accomplished, yet mocked simply because of how you look. That's what happened to Amara Johnson, a black CEO who built her empire from the ground up. In that moment, she faced a choice to shrink under humiliation or to stand tall and remind the world that dignity is not for sale. But what would you do if it were you? Would you walk away in silence or fight back with the kind of calm strength that changes everything? This is more than a story about cars or showrooms. It's a story about power, prejudice, and the courage to turn mockery into a movement. And it will make you wonder about the choices you've faced in your own life, the times you've been underestimated, the times you've had to decide whether to stay silent or speak up. Stay with us, because her response didn't just shock the showroom, it shook the entire system. If this resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the full story. The late afternoon sun slid between the towers of Manhattan, throwing long golden lines across Fifth Avenue. The city was alive in that particular way. Only New York could be horns, heels on pavement, and the scent of roasted chestnuts mixing with car exhaust. Amara Johnson tightened her coat around her shoulders as she stepped out of the black town car. She had flown in from Atlanta that morning, and after a morning of back-to-back meetings with venture partners, she craved one moment of quiet before heading back to the hotel. That quiet, strangely enough, she hoped to find inside the most extravagant car showroom in Midtown's Sterling Lux Motors. To anyone else, it was just a building with glass walls and polished marble floors. To Amara, it was a piece of unfinished business. For years, her logistics company had been approached by automakers hoping to strike distribution contracts. Sterling Lux was the crown jewel, Europe's most prestigious luxury brand, opening a flagship in Manhattan. Their cars weren't just vehicles. They were rolling statements of wealth, of legacy. Amara could afford dozens, but today she wanted just one. Not for vanity, not for headlines, just for herself. A celebration of 20 years of sleepless nights building Johnson Global Logistics from a rented office with 2 desks into a billion-dollar powerhouse. She brushed a strand of hair back and walked toward the glass doors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and cedarwood polish. Gleaming cars sat on raised platforms under spotlight halos. A white convertible reflected the city lights like a diamond. A black coupe crouched low and muscular, as if ready to pounce. The showroom was quiet. Voices hushed in reverence. Customers wandered, some sipping champagne poured by a uniformed server. Amara paused, just breathing in the space. For a brief second, she was no CEO, no board chair, no name whispered in corporate corridors. She was just a woman admiring beauty crafted on 4 wheels. Then, as she stepped toward a deep blue sedan, the one she had seen in magazines, her peace fractured. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was sharp, clipped, coming from her right. A man in a tailored navy suit approached, a silver pin on his lapel that read Sterling Lux. His hair was slicked back, his jaw tight. He looked her up and down with eyes that calculated and dismissed all at once. It was Edward Whitmore, the showroom director. "Yes." Amara's tone was polite. His smile was professional, but thin. The kind of smile that carried no warmth. "Perhaps you're lost. There's a Honda dealership 3 blocks south. This," he gestured at the polished cars around them, "is Sterling Lux. We only entertain serious buyers." For a second, Amara thought she had misheard, but the silence that fell around them told her otherwise. A couple near the champagne cart smirked. The young receptionist at the desk shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between them. Amara inhaled slowly. Her instinct was to correct him, to remind him that she had flown first class that morning, that her driver was parked outside, that her net worth eclipsed his entire showroom's inventory, but she didn't. She simply said, "I'm exactly where I intended to be." Edward chuckled, the sound more mocking than amused. "Of course. Well, browsing is free, but I'll need to ask you not to touch the vehicles. These are multi-million-dollar machines. We can't risk fingerprints or scuffs." The words carried weight. They weren't rules. Amara had already seen two men earlier sliding into a leather seat while a salesman laughed along. This was directed at her, and only her. A young employee behind the desk, Rachel Kim, seemed frozen, her hand hovering over her tablet. Amara noticed the phone camera angled subtly upward, its red light on. Perhaps Rachel was recording, perhaps not. Either way, the sting was real. Amara smiled faintly, though her chest tightened. "I understand the value of what you sell here. Mr. Whitmore, Edward Whitmore, showroom director." His chest swelled at the title. "Well, Mr. Whitmore," Amara said evenly. "I think you'll find I respect value more than most." Her voice was calm. Too calm, perhaps. For the storm building in the room, a cough from the corner drew their eyes. Thomas and Eleanor Harrington, socialites well known in New York circles, sipped champagne and exchanged smirks. Thomas muttered loud enough for others to hear, "She probably wants to take a selfie and pretend it's hers." A ripple of chuckles followed. Amara's hand stayed at her sides. She had weathered worse closed-door boardrooms where her ideas were dismissed until repeated by someone else. Interviews where journalists asked about her clothes before her company's revenue. But here, in this glossy cathedral of privilege, the sting felt heavier, because it wasn't just an insult. It was a dismissal of her right to even exist in the space. Edward gestured subtly to the security guard near the entrance. Marcus Lee, tall and broad-shouldered, began walking over. His eyes flicked with recognition. He seemed to know this wasn't right, but duty tugged at him. "Ma'am, if you'd like to continue looking—" "I'll have to insist you do so quickly," Edward said. His voice edged now with irritation. "We have real clients arriving soon. For the first time—" Amara felt heat rise in her chest, but she steadied it. Her father's words echoed, as they often did, "Dignity is your greatest armor. Never let them strip it away, no matter how sharp their tongues." So she nodded slightly and said, "Then let's not waste either of our time. I'd like to see the sales manager." The air shifted. A boldness in her tone made a few heads turn. Even Marcus hesitated, as if unsure whether to step closer or stand back. Edward raised an eyebrow. "The sales manager is unavailable, but I assure you, our time is precious. Unless you intend to place a deposit, I do." Amara's words cut clean. Silence spread through the showroom. For the first time. Edward's smirk faltered. His eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with disbelief. "Is that so?" Amara simply looked at him, her gaze steady, her voice calm. "That's so." And in that moment, though no one yet knew who she was, though the champagne still sparkled in the Harringtons' glasses, though Marcus still hovered uncertain, the first shift in power had begun. The showroom thought they knew her story, but they were only on the first page. The silence inside Sterling Lux stretched thin, like glass about to crack. Edward Whitmore blinked, struggling to process what Amara Johnson had just said. A deposit from her. His mind tried to reconcile her plain wool coat, the simple gold earrings, the worn leather tote bag she carried, with the idea of serious money. Behind him, Eleanor Harrington let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, darling, this is priceless. She thinks she can just stroll in off the street and buy a sterling." Thomas grinned, swirling champagne in his glass. "Perhaps she'll pay in cash. Crumpled bills. Maybe." Their voices were deliberately loud, meant for the entire showroom. Amara didn't turn toward them. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer to the deep blue sedan on the platform. The light glinted off its flawless paint, the kind of blue that seemed to shift with every breath. She placed her hands behind her back, observing, her posture composed, her gaze steady. "I'd like to speak with the manager handling fleet contracts," she said. Edward stiffened. Few outside the industry knew about those contracts. They weren't for single cars. They were for entire networks, deals worth tens of millions, sometimes hundreds. Why his voice was clipped? "Because I don't buy toys. I build partnerships." A murmur rippled through the few customers and employees nearby. Rachel Kim's hand trembled slightly as she held her phone low. Camera still pointed toward the scene. She wasn't just recording, now she was invested. Edward cleared his throat. "I think we've wasted enough time. Marcus." He snapped his fingers toward the security guard. Marcus Lee shifted his weight. He was a mountain of a man, shoulders broad under a tailored blazer. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes revealed conflict. He had grown up in Harlem, had seen how assumptions cut deeper than knives, but he also had a family, a paycheck, and a director who signed his evaluations. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "maybe we should—" "I said escort her out." Edward's voice rose, sharp as a whip. Amara turned to Marcus before he could move. Her eyes met his steady, calm, and filled with something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not anger, something else. Dignity. "You know this isn't right," she said softly, only for him to hear. Marcus froze. His hand, half extended toward her, dropped to his side. Edward's jaw tightened. "Marcus." But the guard didn't move. The air thickened with tension. The Harringtons looked delighted, sipping their champagne as if watching a play. Other customers hovered, pretending to admire cars, but clearly eavesdropping. Amara broke the silence. "Tell me, Mr. Whitmore, how many of these cars will be shipped across America this year?" 203. Edward hesitated. "That information is confidential." She nodded. "Of course, but I can tell you exactly how many of your shipments will arrive late if you keep treating people like this. All it takes is one call." Her words landed like a stone in still water, sending invisible ripples outward. Edward tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "You're bluffing." Amara tilted her head. "Try me." Rachel Kim felt her pulse quicken. She hadn't known who this woman was, but there was something in the way she spoke. Authority without raising her voice. Power without theatrics. Edward's face reddened. "That's enough. You have two choices. Ms. Whoever you are, leave quietly, or I'll have you removed." For the first time. Amara's calm cracked just enough to reveal steel underneath. "My name is Amara Johnson." She let the words settle, her voice low but clear. "And I am the CEO of Johnson Global Logistics. We move more freight across this country than any other private firm, including your cars." Gas echoed. Even the Harringtons fell silent. Marcus Lee's eyes widened. He had heard the name before. Everyone in logistics had. Johnson Global wasn't just big, it was colossal. They controlled ports, rail lines, trucking fleets. If Amara wanted, she could delay deliveries of Sterling Lux vehicles nationwide with the stroke of a pen. Edward, However, tried to recover. That's impossible. Johnson Global as Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled it out. The screen lit up with the name Charles Beaumont, CEO of Sterling Lux International. The timing was uncanny, almost theatrical. She swiped to answer, turning on speaker. Charles. The room went still. Amara. A warm British voice filled the air. I just got word you might stop by the Manhattan showroom. Are you there now? Edward's mouth fell open. Yes, Amara said calmly. I'm here. Unfortunately, I'm not exactly being welcomed. A pause on the line. Then Beaumont's tone hardened. Is that so? Who is managing the floor? Amara's eyes rested on Edward. She didn't need to answer. I'll find out, Beaumont said coldly. Stay put. Do nothing. I'll handle this. The call ended. The showroom buzzed with whispers. The Harringtons exchanged uneasy glances. Rachel Kim's recording hand trembled. This was gold, absolute gold. Edward's face drained of color. He muttered something under his breath, then tried to recover, forcing a smile. Ms. Johnson, forgive me. There must have been a misunderstanding. Amara didn't respond. She simply looked at him, calm, unreadable. At that moment, Daniel Ross, a businessman in his 50s who had been quietly browsing, stepped forward. His voice carried weight. I recognized her the moment she walked in. He said, She's telling the truth. And I'll add this, if Sterling Lux treats a client of her caliber like this, maybe it's not the kind of company I want to buy from. His words hung in the air like a judgment. Edward swallowed hard. Rachel finally lowered her phone, her hands trembling with adrenaline. She had captured every word, every insult, every shift in tone. The video would be devastating if it ever left the building. Edward knew it too. His eyes flicked to Rachel's phone, then back to Amara. Panic began to seep through his polished exterior. But Amara didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, Respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost everything. The words were quiet. Yet in that showroom, under the glare of spotlights and the watchful eyes of bystanders, they landed harder than any shout. And though no one could see the storm already brewing behind closed doors, everyone sensed it. The night was far from over. The tension in Sterling Lux's Manhattan showroom lingered like static in the air. Conversations had stilled. The clink of champagne glasses had gone quiet. Everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Edward Whitmore tried to regain control. His hands fidgeted with the cuff of his jacket. His voice carefully measured. Ms. Johnson. Of course. You're welcome here. I had no idea who you were. Amara Johnson raised an eyebrow. Her expression betrayed nothing. Calm, reserved. But her silence spoke louder than words. The damage was already done. From the far side of the room, Eleanor Harrington muttered, Oh, now he bows. Her husband chuckled, but the sound lacked conviction. They soared, sensed the shift in the air. At the reception desk, Rachel Kim's phone was still recording. Her thumb hovered over the screen, unsure if she should keep going. But something deep in her gut told her this mattered. She whispered to herself, People need to see this. Rachel had started at Sterling Lux only 6 months earlier. She'd faced her share of microaggressions, 2 customers assuming she was just the intern, senior managers telling her to smile more. But this, watching her director humiliate a black woman in front of everyone, this was on another level. She angled the phone slightly, capturing Edward's nervous stance. Amara's composed posture, and the cluster of bystanders pretending not to stare. "Respect costs nothing," Amara said again, her voice calm, steady. "But disrespect can cost everything." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the chandeliers above. Marcus Lee, the security guard, exhaled slowly. He felt as if he'd been holding his breath for the last 10 minutes. The way she spoke, it stirred something inside him. He thought about his own daughter, just 15, smart as a whip. If she walked into a showroom one day, would someone look her up and down and decide she didn't belong? He shifted his stance, stepping subtly closer to Amar, not in a threatening way, but in quiet solidarity. Edward cleared his throat. Why don't we show you to one of our private suites? Ms. Johnson. We can discuss options there." It was a feeble attempt to move the humiliation out of public view. Amara's gaze didn't waver. "No. We'll have this conversation right here." Her refusal struck like a drumbeat. The Harringtons looked away, suddenly fascinated by the coupe on the pedestal. Other customers shuffled uncomfortably. Edward paled. The weight of exposure was pressing in, and then it happened. The faint ping of a phone notification echoed across the showroom floor. Then another, and another. Rachel's video, uploaded just minutes earlier to her private account, had started spreading. She hadn't expected it to blow up so quickly. But the internet had its own rhythm, its own appetite. The title was simple: Luxury Showroom. Director humiliates black woman. Watch her response. Within 10 minutes, hundreds of views, then thousands. Comments flooded in. Outrage, solidarity, calls for accountability. Rachel glanced down at her phone, heart pounding. She hadn't planned for this to go viral in real time, but the momentum was unstoppable now. Meanwhile, Amara remained composed. She didn't know about the video yet, but she felt the shift in the room, the whispers, the subtle buzz of phones in purses and pockets. News was already seeping out like water through cracks. Daniel Ross stepped closer to her side. "Ms. Johnson," he said quietly, "if you'd like me to provide a statement, I will. What happened here was wrong." She looked at him, a small nod of gratitude softening her features. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Edward tried once more, desperation leaking into his voice. "Let's just put this behind us. No harm done." Amara's calm gaze cut through him. "No harm. You humiliated me in front of your staff and customers. You judge me not by what I've earned or built, but by the color of my skin and the simplicity of my coat. That harm is not erased by a weak apology." Her words struck the room like a gavel in a courtroom. Marcus Lee's throat tightened. He wanted to applaud, but professionalism anchored him in silence. Still, he knew he'd never forget this moment. And then, the twist no one saw coming. Amara's phone buzzed again. She answered without hesitation, putting it on speaker. The voice of Charles Beaumont filled the room once more. "Amara," he said, his tone sharp now. "I've just seen the live footage. It's already trending." Edward's knees nearly buckled. Live footage. Trending. He turned slowly, his eyes landing on Rachel, who shrank back behind the reception desk, clutching her phone like a shield. "Charles," Amara replied, her tone cool. "I told you I wanted to see how your people treated customers on the ground. Now you have your answer." Beaumont's voice hardened. "Edward Whitmore is finished. Effective immediately." The words echoed through the speakers. A public execution carried out in real time. Edward's face drained of all color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Gas filled the room. The Harringtons exchanged wide-eyed looks. Someone muttered, "Oh my God, did that just happen?" Rachel stopped recording, her chest tight with adrenaline. She hadn't expected to capture a firing live. This was bigger than she ever imagined. Marcus Lee took a step back, almost in disbelief. In 20 years of working security, he had never seen power shift so quickly, so absolutely. Edward finally found his voice, a pitiful whisper. "Please, Amara." "I didn't mean." Amara raised her hand gently, silencing him without a word. Her calmness was sharper than any anger. "Intentions matter less than actions," she said softly. "And your actions told me everything." She turned her back on him, walking toward the sedan again. Her reflection glowed in its polished surface. "I came here today not to flaunt wealth, but to celebrate hard work, to choose something beautiful as a symbol of what I've built. Instead, you reminded me, and everyone watching, that respect is still a currency too many people refuse to spend." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. She had endured her own quiet humiliations, but she had never heard someone articulate the pain so clearly, so calmly. The Harringtons slipped out quietly, no longer laughing. Daniel Ross stayed rooted, his respect for Amara deepening by the second. Marcus Lee stood tall, his expression unreadable, but inside he felt pride swelling. And Edward. He slumped near the glass wall, his title and authority stripped away in less than an hour. Outside, the city kept moving, taxis honking, people rushing home, lights flickering on across skyscrapers. But inside Sterling Lux, time felt frozen. The humiliation Edward tried to inflict had transformed into his own downfall, and Amara Johnson, with nothing but composure, presence, and truth, had turned the showroom into a stage where justice played out in real time. What none of them fully grasped yet was that this was only the beginning. By morning, the whole country would be watching. That night, New York didn't sleep. Rachel Kim's shaky video, barely 4 minutes long, had already crossed 500,000 views before she even left her shift. By midnight, it had crossed 2 million. Hashtags multiplied. Showroom shame. Respect us nothing. Amara Johnson. The comments were relentless. Some were furious. This is what black professionals face every day. Others were shocked. How could they treat her like that in Manhattan in 2025? And then came the flood of admiration. Her calm destroyed him more than anger ever could. Rachel sat on the edge of her tiny apartment bed in Queens, her phone buzzing nonstop. She hadn't expected to become part of a storm. She hadn't even put her name on the clip, but people were already piecing it together. She felt fear in her chest. Would she lose her job? But beneath the fear was something stronger: relief. For once, the truth was out in the open. By morning, the video was everywhere. Good Morning America ran it. CNN replayed it on loop with analysts discussing systemic bias in luxury industries. Social media platforms carried side-by-side breakdowns of Edward Whitmore's sneer and Amara's composure. At Sterling Lux headquarters in London, Charles Beaumont woke to a nightmare. Investors called demanding answers. Civil rights groups issued statements. Several celebrity clients posted messages of solidarity with Amara, threatening to sever ties if the company didn't respond decisively. And in Atlanta, at the gleaming Johnson Global Tower, Amara herself was watching. She sat alone in her office on the 42nd floor, a steaming cup of black coffee in her hand. She hadn't slept much. The whirlwind of notifications, the calls from friends and colleagues, the sudden spotlight, it was overwhelming. But she remained centered. She whispered to herself, It's not about me. It's about the message. Later that morning, her assistant knocked gently on the door. Ms. Johnson, the press is outside. They're asking for a statement. Amara set down her coffee. All right. When she stepped into the lobby, flashbulbs erupted, reporters jostled, microphones extended, questions fired from every direction. Ms. Johnson, do you plan to sue Sterling Lux? Do you accept Edward Whitmore's apology? Is this incident symbolic of wider discrimination in luxury industries? Amara raised her hand slightly. The noise fell quiet, surprisingly quick. There was something about her presence measured, poised, that commanded attention. I will not comment on one man's poor judgment alone, she said. This is bigger than Edward Whitmore. This is about a system that still decides who belongs and who doesn't, based on shallow assumptions. Her voice was calm, but firm. I did not walk into that showroom to make headlines. I walked in to buy a car. What I received instead was humiliation. But the truth is, my story isn't unique. It happens every day, to people without cameras, without a platform. My hope is that this moment sparks more than outrage. My hope is that it sparks change. Reporters scribbled furiously. The sound bites were already golden. Meanwhile, inside the Manhattan showroom, chaos reigned. Edward's office was empty, his nameplate stripped from the glass. Staff whispered about his fall. Rachel walked in nervously, unsure if she'd still have a job. But instead of reprimand, Charles Beaumont himself appeared via live video conference, projected on the showroom's main display. His words were clipped, formal, but unmistakably pointed. Sterling Lux condemns discrimination in every form. What happened in this showroom was unacceptable. Effective immediately. We are launching an independent investigation across all our U.S. branches. Mandatory anti-bias training will begin within the week. And to Ms. Amara Johnson, on behalf of our company, I offer a sincere and public apology. The employees exchanged stunned glances. It wasn't enough to erase the wound, but it was a beginning. Rachel, standing in the back, felt her knees tremble. She hadn't expected her shaky video to spark corporate reform. In Atlanta, Amara's phone buzzed again. A message from Marcus Lee, the security guard who had stood frozen between orders and conscience. Thank you. You reminded me of my own daughter. She deserves a world that sees her worth. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Amara read the message twice. A quiet warmth spread through her chest. She whispered, "It matters that you see it now." But with attention came backlash. Online, anonymous voices sneered. She played the race card. She's rich. Why should we care? If she didn't want trouble, she shouldn't have gone in dressed like that. Amara read some of the comments, her jaw tightening. The cruelty wasn't new. It was simply louder now. Yet in the noise, she also saw messages from young women. I've been told I don't belong, too. Watching you stand calm gave me strength. My mom works in retail and faces this every day. Thank you for speaking out. You showed me how dignity fights back. Those words meant more than headlines or stock prices. That evening, Amara sat by her apartment window, watching the lights of Atlanta stretch across the horizon. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from weakness, but from release. She remembered her father's voice. Dignity is your greatest armor. He had been right, but armor was heavy. Carrying it day after day took its toll. She let the tears fall, then wiped them away. Tomorrow, she whispered. We keep moving. Back in New York, the Harringtons tried to distance themselves from the scandal. Their PR team released a bland statement claiming their remarks were taken out of context. But the internet wasn't forgiving. Memes flooded timelines. Their smirking faces became symbols of elitist cruelty. Daniel Ross, the businessman who had spoken up, found his inbox full of messages thanking him for breaking the silence. In interviews, he kept repeating one phrase: "It shouldn't take courage to do the right thing." But sometimes it does. By the end of the week, Sterling Lux's stock had dipped 8%. Calls for boycotts surged. Beaumont flew to Atlanta personally, asking for a meeting with Amara. She agreed, but with conditions: full transparency, measurable reforms, and public accountability. In their closed-door meeting, Beaumont tried to explain, to justify. Amara simply listened, then said, "Change isn't an apology. Change is policy." And as word of that conversation leaked, the world took notice again. What began as one humiliating encounter in a Manhattan showroom had grown into a national reckoning. Commentators called it a Rosa Parks moment in luxury retail. Others framed it as a case study in leadership under fire. But for Amara, it was simpler than that. It was proof that dignity, wielded with patience and courage, could still shake walls built on arrogance. And the world had only seen the first act. By the second week, the clip had crossed 40 million views. What began as a confrontation in a glittering Manhattan showroom had grown into something far larger, a cultural flashpoint. Cable news anchors dissected the footage in slow motion. Morning talk shows invited panels of diversity experts. Late-night comedians used Edward Whitmore's smug grin as the butt of jokes. Memes exploded, pairing Amara's calm words with captions like, "Respect costs nothing, but look what it just cost him," everywhere she turned. Amara Johnson's name was on screens. She hadn't sought this. For most of her career, she'd been known only in logistics circles, a quiet titan moving cargo across continents. But now, ordinary people stopped her in grocery stores, whispering thanks. College students sent her emails describing how her composure gave them courage, and she felt the weight of it all pressing on her shoulders. One Tuesday morning, Amara sat in her Atlanta office, the skyline glowing outside her floor-to-ceiling windows. Her communications director, Carla Nguyen, entered with a folder stuffed with press requests. "They all want you," Carla said. "CNN, MSNBC, even 60 Minutes. They want interviews, op-eds, speaking engagements. You're not just a CEO, now you're a story." Amara exhaled slowly. "And stories come with expectations." Carla hesitated. "You don't have to do this. You can step back, issue one statement, let it fade." Amara shook her head. "If I step back, people will think this was just about me. But it isn't. It's about the everyday humiliations that never make the news. If I have a platform, I'll use it." Her decision was made. That weekend, she appeared on national television, sitting under the bright studio lights. She wore a simple navy dress, her hands folded loosely on her lap. The interviewer leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, you had every reason to respond with anger that day. Why didn't you?" Amara's voice was steady, because anger would have let them dismiss me as emotional. Calm forced them to face what they had done. "My father taught me that dignity is the sharpest blade." The clip went viral again. Hashtags now carried her quote alongside images of civil rights icons. At Sterling Lux International, the storm was relentless. Charles Beaumont convened emergency meetings with his board. A thick binder of lawsuits and complaints landed on the table. Civil rights attorneys hinted at class actions. Beaumont knew a symbolic apology wasn't enough anymore. He needed Amara's cooperation. He flew again to Atlanta, this time with a full delegation. They arrived at Johnson Global Tower in dark suits, their expressions grim. Inside the boardroom, Beaumont extended a hand. "Miss Johnson, thank you for meeting us again." Amara shook it politely. "Let's be clear, Charles. This isn't a courtesy meeting. This is accountability." Beaumont nodded, swallowing hard. What followed was hours of negotiation. Amara outlined reforms, independent anti-bias oversight, not run by Sterling Lux itself, anonymous reporting systems for staff and customers, public disclosure of complaints and resolutions, concrete hiring targets for diversity in management. Beaumont's team balked. "These measures are aggressive," one executive muttered. Amara's calm reply silenced the room. "So was humiliating a black woman in front of your flagship showroom. Aggression was already on the table. Reform is the only way forward." By the end of the day, Sterling Lux agreed in principle. Meanwhile, in New York, Edward Whitmore vanished from public view. Paparazzi snapped him entering a townhouse at dawn, pale and hunched. Rumors spread. Some said he was trying to negotiate a quiet settlement. Others claimed he was preparing to sue the company for wrongful termination. But online, no one was sympathetic. His name had become shorthand for arrogance. Even former friends in the industry distanced themselves. Back in Atlanta, Amara's evenings grew heavier. She would sit alone on her balcony, staring at the city lights. Publicly, she was calm, composed, unwavering. Privately, she wrestled with fatigue. She remembered her mother's voice. "Baby, don't let them turn your victories into burdens." But wasn't that what was happening? The world wanted her to be a symbol, a standard bearer. And all she had wanted, that day in New York, was to celebrate 20 years of work with one beautiful car. She let herself wonder, was it worth it? Then came the letter, delivered in a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page, written in the uneven script of a child. "Dear Ms. Johnson, my name is Naomi. I'm 13. When I saw your video, I cried because it felt like me. People at school tell me I don't belong, but you showed me I do. Thank you for being brave." Tears blurred the words as Amara read them. She pressed the letter to her chest. "This," she thought, "this is why?" Soon after, she accepted an invitation to testify before a congressional committee on corporate accountability. The hearing was televised. Lawmakers asked pointed questions. Cameras captured her steady presence as she described not just her own experience, but the systemic patterns countless others had endured. Her words echoed across living rooms nationwide. "We can legislate policies, but dignity is enforced in daily choices. Every interaction, every assumption, every word. That's where justice begins." Applause broke out, even in the austere chamber. Rachel Kim watched from her apartment, pride swelling. She had taken a risk uploading that video. Now she saw it ripple into policy, into legislation. She whispered to herself, it mattered. It really mattered. Marcus Lee watched too, his daughter sitting beside him. When Amara spoke about daily choices, he felt as if she was speaking directly to him. His daughter squeezed his hand. "Daddy, you're one of the good ones." "Right." His eyes stung. "I try to be, baby. I try." Daniel Ross, the businessman who had stepped forward in the showroom, became a minor hero himself. His willingness to break the silence was praised in op-eds. He received invitations to speak at ethics panels. When asked why he did it, he always said the same thing, "Because I couldn't look at myself in the mirror if I didn't." For Amara, the storm was far from over. But as she stood on stages, her voice steady, her story amplified, she realized something profound. Her humiliation in that glossy Manhattan showroom had been real. It had cut deep. But it had also revealed her strength not just to the world, but to herself. And with that strength, she carried the voices of millions who had been dismissed, doubted, and disrespected. The world was watching, and she was ready to keep speaking. The ripple began quietly, in small towns across the country, in barbershops and diners. People replayed the video on cracked phone screens. Some shook their heads in recognition. Others clenched fists in anger. The scene of Amara standing in that shimmering showroom had pierced something raw and familiar. "See? That's how it happens," an older man muttered in a Detroit cafe. "You can work twice as hard, dress twice as sharp. But to them, you're still just—" His voice broke off. The others nodded, silent but heavy with understanding. At the same time, in corporate boardrooms, executives studied the fallout with dread. If Sterling Lux could be brought to its knees by one viral moment, then no brand was safe. Memos circulated quietly, review customer policies, retrain staff, audit complaints. Amara's humiliation had become everyone's mirror. Community groups began to mobilize. In Atlanta, college students staged a rally outside Johnson Global Tower, holding signs that read "Dignity is non-negotiable and we are Amara." They weren't protesting her, they were celebrating, using her story as a banner for broader change. When Amara stepped outside to meet them, she didn't stand on a podium. She simply walked among the students, shaking hands, listening. A young woman in a denim jacket grabbed her hand. "Ms. Johnson, when I saw you that day, I felt like it was my mama standing there. You made her proud." Amara's throat tightened. "Then I'll keep standing for her too." Not all voices were kind. Comment threads filled with skepticism. "She's rich. Why should we care about her feelings? Or this is just performative outrage." Conservative pundits scoffed, calling it a manufactured crisis. But Amara refused to fuel the fire with anger. In interviews, she acknowledged the criticism. "They're right in one sense," she told a reporter. "I am privileged compared to many. But that's exactly why I speak up, because if this can happen to me, imagine what happens to those without my resources. This isn't just my story. It's all of ours." Her humility disarmed many skeptics. Meanwhile, Rachel Kim found herself unexpectedly famous. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, sponsorship offers, even strangers asking for advice. One evening, sitting at her kitchen table, she admitted to her sister, "I didn't do anything special. I just hit record." Her sister shook her head. "You saw something wrong and refused to look away. That's more special than you think." Rachel decided to use her new platform carefully. She partnered with a nonprofit that trained bystanders to intervene safely in public harassment. "If I could do it, anyone can," she said at their first workshop. The only difference between silence and change is courage in the moment. Back at Sterling Lux, resistance brewed. Middle managers whispered that the reforms were too heavy-handed, that Amara was wielding her influence unfairly. Beaumont faced pressure from shareholders worried about profit margins. In one tense meeting, an executive slammed his fist on the table. "We're in the business of selling luxury, not running social experiments." Beaumont's reply was wary but firm. "Luxury without dignity isn't luxury. It's theater." And the audience has walked out. The room fell silent. Amara herself wrestled with the widening scope of her influence. One night, she sat in her office long past midnight. The city outside was hushed, a blanket of quiet punctuated by the hum of neon. On her desk lay stacks of letters, some handwritten, Others printed emails, each telling stories of humiliation, rejection, invisibility. She read them one by one. A black nurse in Texas denied service at a boutique. A Latino father told to leave a dealership showroom. An Asian teenager mocked for not looking rich enough. Their pain seeped into her bones. She pressed her palms to her temples. "What if I can't carry all of this?" she whispered. Her assistant Carla peeked in. "You don't have to carry it all. Just carry enough to keep the door open for others to walk through." Amara looked up, tears softening her eyes. "And what if I fall?" Carla smiled gently. "Then we'll catch you." The tide of public opinion surged again when a coalition of civil rights groups announced the launch of the Dignity Initiative, inspired directly by Amara's ordeal. The initiative aimed to pressure corporations into adopting anti-discrimination standards, offering public scorecards for accountability. Amara was invited to serve as honorary chair. She hesitated at first, worried about overextending, but ultimately accepted. At the launch event in Washington, she stood behind a simple wooden lectern. Cameras flashed, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the faces before her. "I didn't ask to be here," she began softly. "But life doesn't always ask. It calls. And when it does, you either answer with fear or with purpose. Today, I choose purpose." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Still, the conflict with Sterling Lux wasn't finished. Edward Whitmore resurfaced briefly, filing a countersuit claiming defamation. His lawyers argued that Amara's words had ruined his reputation unfairly. The suit was dismissed swiftly. The video spoke for itself, but the attempt reignited public anger. Protesters gathered outside his townhouse, chanting for accountability. Amara said nothing publicly about Whitmore. Privately, she told Carla, "The law already judged him. I don't need revenge. I need reform." It was another moment of restraint that deepened respect for her. The climax of this phase came when Sterling Lux's board invited Amara to New York to finalize their partnership agreement. Cameras swarmed the sidewalk as she entered the same glass doors where she had once been mocked. Inside, the showroom gleamed as always. But this time, the staff greeted her with measured respect, their voices tinged with caution. Beaumont met her at the center of the room. He extended his hand. "Ms. Johnson, welcome back. Things will be different from now on." Amara accepted the handshake, but her words carried steel. Different is not enough. Lasting is what matters. The flashbulbs caught the moment the once dismissed woman now standing as equal, if not superior, to the empire that had scorned her. Amara had never sought the spotlight. For years, she worked quietly in boardrooms, negotiating contracts, expanding Johnson Global Logistics into a global powerhouse. She prided herself on results, not recognition. Yet now, she couldn't step into a cafe or airport lounge without whispers following her. "That's her," someone would murmur. "The woman from the video." Strangers approached her with gratitude, tears, or stories of their own humiliations. She listened patiently, but each encounter left her both inspired and drained. At night, when the city dimmed and the office emptied, she often sat alone in her penthouse suite, staring at the skyline. The weight of being a symbol pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Am I strong enough to carry this?" she whispered once. The question swallowed by the silence. The pressure began to infiltrate her business life, too. During a high-stakes meeting with potential investors from Dubai, the first 15 minutes weren't about logistics or numbers. They asked instead about the Sterling Lux controversy. "Ms. Johnson," one delegate said, leaning forward, You've become a figure in America's social landscape. Does this distract you from ensuring profitability? Amara paused, steadying her breath. She felt the eyes of her team on her. My company was built on resilience, she replied calmly. What happened at that showroom didn't weaken me. It clarified me. And clarity is good for business. The investors exchanged looks. They nodded, impressed by her composure. But when the meeting ended, Amara excused herself, retreating to the restroom. She leaned against the counter, palms pressed against the cool marble, heart pounding. For the first time, she admitted the truth to herself. She was afraid. Rachel Kim noticed the toll, too. Over coffee in a quiet Atlanta cafe, Rachel studied Amara's face. You're carrying more than anyone should, she said softly. Amara gave a tired smile. Comes with the territory. Rachel shook her head. No, it doesn't. You didn't ask to be a movement. You were just buying a car. Amara laughed bitterly. The world doesn't always care what we ask for. It cares what we do with what we're given. Rachel hesitated, then leaned in. Then maybe you need to start giving yourself permission to rest. Movements burn out when leaders do. The words stayed with Amara long after Rachel left. Her private life frayed too. One evening, her younger brother, Isaiah, confronted her during a family dinner. Sis, you're barely here anymore. Even when you're at the table, your mind's somewhere else. Amara set down her fork. I'm trying, Isaiah, but people are counting on me. And what about us? What about you? His voice cracked. I don't want to lose my sister to a fight that never ends. The room fell silent. Their mother reached across, squeezing Amara's hand. Her eyes, weary with decades of her own battles, said what words could not take care of yourself. 2. That night, Amara lay awake, Isaiah's words echoing. For the first time, she wondered if the cause she carried might cost her the people she loved most. Meanwhile, resistance outside grew louder. A network of commentators mocked her as the showroom queen, painting her as opportunistic. Online forums twisted her story, claiming she orchestrated the incident for publicity. Amara ignored most of it, but some nights, when exhaustion lowered her defenses, she scrolled through the vitriol. Words like fraud and race baiter burned. Carla, her trusted communications director, found her one morning hunched over her laptop, eyes red. Stop feeding the fire, Carla urged gently. They want you rattled. Don't give them that. Amara closed the screen, but sighed. They don't even know me, yet they're certain of my worth. Carla met her gaze. Then let the people who do know you remind you who you are. A turning point came when Amara accepted an invitation to speak at a university in Chicago. She hesitated at first, fearing it would turn into another media circus, but something inside urged her to go. Standing before a hall of 800 students, she scanned the eager faces. Her prepared speech lay untouched on the podium. Instead, she spoke from the heart. I don't stand here as a perfect symbol, she said slowly. I stand here as a woman who once wanted to buy a car and was told she wasn't worthy. That moment could have broken me. Instead, it woke me. And now, I wake with you. The room erupted in applause. Some students cried openly. One young man whispered to his friend, She sounds like she's talking about my dad. For Amara, the moment was both humbling and liberating. She realized she didn't have to be flawless. She just had to be present, honest, and willing. On the flight home, she journaled quietly, something she hadn't done in months. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to move through it. I am not a statue for people to worship. I am a woman, breathing, learning, stumbling, standing again. If they see themselves in me, then maybe my cracks are what make the light visible. She closed the notebook, exhaling deeply. For the first time, the weight on her chest felt lighter. Back in Atlanta, she gathered her leadership team. We've been reactive, she admitted. It's time we become proactive. If the world wants me as a symbol, let's decide what that symbol stands for. She unveiled a new plan, a foundation under Johnson Global Logistics dedicated to promoting dignity in business grants for minority entrepreneurs, training for corporations, and scholarships for students committed to equity. Her team erupted in support. Carla's eyes shone. This isn't just about fighting back. It's about building forward. Amara nodded. Exactly. Let's turn pain into blueprint. But that night, alone in her apartment, Amara stood at her window, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline. She whispered into the dark, "Lord, give me strength not just to lead, but to last." The silence offered no reply, but she felt steadier. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet flame still burned. By late autumn, Sterling Lux was unraveling. Sales had plummeted 27% in a single quarter. The Manhattan showroom, once bustling with clients eager to sip champagne and test drive six-figure cars, now stood half empty. Staff whispered that layoffs were imminent. Headlines called it the Sterling Slide. Amara watched the collapse from a distance. She hadn't gloated. Gloating was never her style. Yet part of her believed this was justice at work, a company that had once dismissed her dignity, now forced to reckon with its own arrogance. Still, when the phone rang late one evening and Carla announced it was Charles Beaumont, CEO of Sterling Lux International, Amara was surprised. "Ms. Johnson." Beaumont's voice crackled over the line. "We need your help." 2 days later, Amara found herself in a polished boardroom overlooking Central Park. The Sterling Lux board of directors sat stiffly around a mahogany table, their faces strained. Beaumont cleared his throat. "The truth is simple. We cannot regain public trust alone. Your name, your leadership, it carries weight. If you were to endorse a new strategic partnership with us, perhaps even co-develop an equity initiative under your guidance, it could stabilize our brand." Amara studied the room. Some directors looked desperate. Others looked resentful, as though choking on the irony of asking help from the woman their company once humiliated. She spoke evenly. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" A director leaned forward. "We want you to serve as an equity ambassador, appear in campaigns, advise reforms, share our stage." The words tasted hollow to her. Amara clasped her hands. "And why should I trust that this isn't just another performance, that you aren't using me to polish a broken mirror?" The room went silent. Beaumont's eyes met hers, steady but pleading. "Because without you, Ms. Johnson, that mirror will shatter completely." That night, Amara paced her hotel suite. The city glimmered outside, but her mind churned within. If she said yes, she risked being seen as complicit in Sterling's failures. If she said no, she risked forfeiting a chance to enact real systemic change from within. She called Isaiah "little brother." "What would you do?" Isaiah chuckled bitterly. "I'd tell them to clean up their own mess." Then his voice softened. "But you're not me. You've always believed in building, not burning." Amara exhaled slowly. "Sometimes I wish I could just walk away," Isaiah replied gently. "But that's not who you are, sis." The following morning, Amara returned to the boardroom. "I'll consider your proposal," she said. But on conditions, transparency, independent oversight, real accountability, not slogans, and I choose the team that implements it. Some directors bristled. One muttered under his breath, "She's holding us hostage." Amara heard but didn't flinch. "I'm not holding you hostage. I'm offering you freedom from your own denial." Beaumont nodded gravely. "Then we are agreed, at least in principle." But just as negotiations inched forward, an unexpected twist emerged. Later that week, a leaked memo surfaced online. It detailed a covert PR strategy inside Sterling Luck's frame Amara as opportunistic, paint her demands as excessive, and quietly undermine her credibility in the press. The author of the memo, a senior executive named Margaret Thompson, someone Amara had met briefly in the Manhattan showroom on the day of the incident. The leak spread like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. "Oh, Sterling sabotage," and "Oh, they never learn." Amara stared at the memo in disbelief. She felt rage bubbling under her calm exterior. This was betrayal not only of her, but of every attempt at genuine reform. Carla stormed into her office. "They invited you in with one hand and stabbed you with the other. We should walk away. Let them drown." But Amara didn't answer right away. She sat in silence, gripping the memo, heart pounding. Inside, a battle raged, anger versus purpose. Finally, she whispered, "No, we don't walk away. We shine brighter. If they want to play in shadows, we'll bring more light." That weekend, Amara held a press conference in Atlanta. Cameras clicked furiously as she stepped to the podium. "I was approached by Sterling Luck to help them rebuild," she said firmly. "But recent revelations show elements within their leadership still resist change. This is not about me. This is about every customer who has ever been made to feel less than human. I will not allow my name to be weaponized against dignity." Reporters shouted questions. One asked, "Does this mean you're cutting ties with Sterling Luck's?" Amara paused. "It means I'm doubling down on accountability. If Sterling Luck wants to move forward, they must clean house completely. Until then, I stand with the people, not the brand." The room erupted in applause. The fallout was immediate. Sterling Luck's stock plunged another 14% overnight. Margaret Thompson resigned under public pressure. Shareholders clamored for Beaumont to salvage what remained of the company's reputation. Meanwhile, Amara's approval soared. Public trust in her deepened. She wasn't seen as a pawn, but as a principled leader. Rachel Kim texted her late that night. "You didn't just expose their betrayal. You rewrote the script again." Amara replied simply, "The script was never theirs to write." Yet beneath the triumph, Amara felt the toll. She sat on her hotel balcony, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. The night air carried a chill. Rustling the curtains behind her, she whispered into the dark, "How many battles must I fight before the war is done?" There was no answer, only the quiet hum of a sleepless city. But deep down, she knew this was bigger than her, bigger than Sterling Luck, bigger than one showroom or one CEO. This was about a world learning slowly, painfully, that dignity is not a luxury. It is a right. The leak had changed everything. Sterling Luck was crumbling under the weight of its own hypocrisy, while Amara's reputation soared higher than ever. Yet instead of celebrating, Amara grew restless. She knew that if she allowed her story to end here, it would fade like so many viral scandals before. "This can't just be about one showroom," she told Carla as they walked through the glass atrium of Johnson Global Tower. "It has to be about building something bigger, something that lasts." Carla tilted her head. "Bigger than Sterling Luck. Bigger than me." Amara said quietly. Within weeks, the framework took shape. Amara announced the launch of the Global Dignity Project, an initiative aimed at transforming corporate culture worldwide. It would fund anti-bias training, support minority entrepreneurs, and publish annual transparency reports ranking companies on dignity and equity. The press conference drew international attention. Reporters from London, Tokyo, and Johannesburg packed the hall. Amara stood at the podium, calm but resolute. Dignity is not a corporate buzzword, she declared. It is the baseline of humanity. If a company cannot treat people with respect, it does not deserve their business. Our project will ensure that dignity is measured, reported, and demanded everywhere. Applause thundered through the hall. Hashtags like Shaw's Global Dignity and Respect is the standard trended across continents. The momentum was staggering. Universities asked her to lecture. Nonprofits sought partnerships. Even rival corporations reached out, eager to align themselves with the rising tide of accountability. But success carried its own shadows. Late one evening, as Amara prepared remarks for a UN panel, she received devastating news her mother had collapsed at home. Amara rushed to the hospital, still in her business suit. In the sterile glow of the ER, she sat at her mother's bedside, holding her frail hand. "You're working too hard," her mother whispered, her voice thin but firm. "And so am I worrying about you." Amara's chest tightened. "Mama, I can't stop now. People are counting on me." Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. "Child, they are counting on your strength, not your exhaustion. You can't pour water from an empty well." Tears filled Amara's eyes. For the first time in months, she felt like a daughter, not a CEO. The scare forced her to slow down, if only briefly. She spent 2 weeks working from her family home in Atlanta, splitting her time between hospital visits and virtual meetings. Isaiah came by one evening with takeout. They sat on the porch, watching the sun sink low. "Remember when we used to dream about running the world?" Isaiah said with a half smile. Amara chuckled. "I don't think I dreamed about the world. I just wanted to make sure you had new sneakers for school." Isaiah's smile faded. "And now you're fighting battles that could change everything. But don't lose yourself in the process. Sis, we need you too." She leaned her head on his shoulder, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Meanwhile, Sterling Lux continued to spiral. Charles Beaumont reached out again, this time not with offers, but with desperation. "Ms. Johnson," he said, during a tense call, "our shareholders are demanding a full overhaul. They want me gone, and they want you to take over the reform process. Officially." Amara's heart skipped. "You're asking me to rebuild the very company that tried to destroy me." Beaumont sighed. "Yes, because if you don't, it won't survive at all." She promised nothing. After hanging up, she sat in silence, the irony heavy in the air. Life had brought her full circle. Rachel Kim visited her soon after. They walked through Piedmont Park, autumn leaves crunching underfoot. "You know what this means?" "Right," Rachel said. "They're basically handing you the keys to rewrite everything." Amara frowned. "Or they're setting me up to take the fall if it fails." Rachel stopped walking, turning to face her. "You've been underestimated your whole life. But if anyone can take their broken pieces and make something better, it's you." Amara looked into Rachel's earnest eyes. A flicker of hope returned. The decision weighed heavily, but Amara finally agreed to a conditional role. She would chair an independent reform council overseeing Sterling Lux's changes. She demanded full authority and public accountability. The announcement shook the business world. Headlines screamed, From humiliation to Amara Johnson to lead Sterling Luxe overhaul. Critics accused her of selling out. Supporters hailed her as visionary. Amara remained steady, though inside, doubt lingered. "This isn't about saving Sterling Luxe," she told Carla. "It's about proving that dignity can be written into the DNA of a corporation. If it works here, it can work anywhere." But just as momentum built, another twist hit. Investigative journalists uncovered that Sterling Luxe's problems ran deeper than bias. Internal documents revealed years of fraudulent reporting and financial mismanagement, all buried beneath a glossy veneer of luxury. The scandal erupted across news outlets. Stock prices plummeted. Lawsuits piled up. Suddenly, Amara's reform mission was entangled with corruption far uglier than she anticipated. Carla threw the papers on Amara's desk. "They lied to you. Again." Amara closed her eyes, pulse racing. The weight of betrayal pressed hard, but beneath it, a sharper resolve sparked. "Then this is bigger than reform," she murmured. "This is reckoning." That night, sitting alone in her office, Amara opened her journal once more. "Life has tested me at every turn. Humiliation, betrayal, doubt. Yet here I stand, still breathing, still fighting. Maybe that is the lesson that dignity is not given. It is forged. And every time I choose to keep going, I am forging it not only for myself, but for those who come after me." She closed the book, her eyes steady. Tomorrow would bring chaos, but she would meet it head on. The revelations about Sterling Luxe's fraudulent finances detonated like a bomb. Headlines screamed across the nation. Sterling Luxe luxury. Sterling Luxe lies. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Regulators announced investigations. For the first time, the luxury giant teetered not just on scandal, but on collapse. Amara sat at the head of a long oak table in a tense Reform Council meeting. Papers littered the surface, each page outlining deeper layers of misconduct, ghost dealerships, inflated invoices, even hush payments to silence whistleblowers. Her team looked grim. Carla tapped her pen against the table. "This isn't just bias. Amara, this is systemic rot. If you tie yourself to this company, you risk going down with them." Amara inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "Or I expose it all, rebuild from ashes, and show the world that dignity doesn't hide from the truth." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Some admired her courage. Others feared her gamble. That evening, Charles Beaumont requested a private meeting. They met in his Manhattan office, the walls lined with framed photographs of him shaking hands with presidents and celebrities. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice heavy. "You've seen the documents. You know the scale of the mess. If this goes public unfiltered, Sterling Luxe won't survive. Tens of thousands of employees will lose their jobs." Amara met his gaze, unflinching. And how many already lost their dignity working under this system? Beaumont rubbed his temples. "I'm asking you, as a partner, now help me contain this. We can fix it quietly." Her chest tightened. This was the moment of truth. "No, Mr. Beaumont," she said firmly. "You don't fix corruption in the shadows. You face it in the light." His eyes hardened. "If you go that route, you'll make powerful enemies. Some of these practices tie back to people outside this company, people with reach." Amara's pulse quickened, but she didn't waver. "Then let them come. I've been underestimated before. I survived mockery, betrayal, humiliation. I won't bend now." The confrontation leaked almost immediately. Someone inside Sterling Luxe whispered to the press, framing Amara as reckless, hungry for destruction. Talk shows debated whether she was a savior or a saboteur. Rachel Kim showed up at Amara's office the next morning, coffee in hand. They're coming after you hard. Are you sure you want to keep pushing? Amara sipped quietly, her eyes tired but fierce. Rachel, when Whitmore mocked me in that showroom, I could have walked away. Instead, I stood my ground. This is no different. The stage is just bigger. Rachel smiled faintly. Then I'll keep my phone ready. If they try anything, I'll hit record again. 2 days later, Amara testified before a congressional committee investigating corporate misconduct. The hearing room buzzed with cameras and murmurs as she raised her right hand, swore the oath, and began. Sterling Lux is not simply guilty of discrimination, she told the panel. It is guilty of deception, manipulation, and exploitation. If we allow corporations to bury truth beneath luxury, we betray the very foundation of trust. Lawmakers leaned forward, captivated. One asked bluntly, Miss Johnson, aren't you afraid of retaliation? Amara paused, then replied, Fear is natural, but silence is unforgivable. The quote spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was on posters, trending hashtags, even protest banners outside Sterling Lux dealerships, behind the scenes. However, the threats became real. One night, Amara's driver noticed a black SUV trailing their car through Atlanta's quiet streets. Another time, anonymous messages filled her inbox. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. Carla grew alarmed. This is bigger than we thought. You need security. Amara resisted at first, but when Isaiah found a threatening note taped to their mother's hospital door, she relented. Armed protection surrounded her family from that day forward, yet even in fear, her resolve sharpened. If they're this desperate to shut me up, she told Carla, then I know I'm close to the heart of it. The ultimate showdown came at a shareholder assembly, broadcast live to the public. Beaumont addressed the crowd first, his voice smooth but strained. We acknowledge past mistakes, but dismantling Sterling Lux completely would devastate countless livelihoods. We must be careful. Then Amara stepped forward. The hall went silent. Careful, she repeated, her voice echoing. Careful is how corruption thrives. Careful is how bias festers. Careful is why I was humiliated in your showroom and why your company now stands on the edge of ruin. The only way forward is truth. No more shadows, no more silence. The audience erupted, some cheering, others shouting in anger. Cameras flashed. The live stream's comments section exploded. One elderly shareholder rose, trembling but resolute. I lost my son because a company like this ignored safety to chase profit. Ms. Johnson is right. No more shadows. His words tipped the scale. The assembly voted overwhelmingly for a full independent audit and restructuring under Amara's Reform Council. Beaumont's authority shrank overnight. Later, alone in her hotel suite, Amara collapsed into a chair. The adrenaline drained, leaving only exhaustion. She buried her face in her hands. Lord, give me strength, she whispered, voice cracking. Because tonight I feel like I've given everything already. A soft knock at the door pulled her up. It was Isaiah, carrying a small bag of her favorite peach tea. You don't have to drink champagne to celebrate, he said with a grin. Sometimes victory tastes like home. Amara smiled through tears. For the first time in weeks, she let herself rest, if only for a moment, because she knew tomorrow the fire would rage again. The news cycle spun faster than Amara had ever imagined. Overnight, clips of her fiery speech at the shareholder assembly spread across every major network. CNN replayed her words, "Careful is how corruption thrives," on a loop. The New York Times ran a front-page headline: CEO exposes Sterling Luck's rot from within. In Atlanta, at Johnson Global's headquarters, her staff stayed late, glued to screens, fielding calls from journalists, regulators, and civil rights groups. Amara walked through the halls, acknowledging them with tired smiles. She knew their pride kept them fueled, even as exhaustion pressed on everyone. But beneath the celebration, a storm brewed. Sterling Luck's insiders leaked documents implicating not just showroom managers, but high-ranking executives and political allies. Offshore accounts, luxury trips billed as client development, even Beaumont's signature approving fraudulent invoices. For every truth revealed, another smear campaign rose against Amara. Pundits questioned her motives. Anonymous blogs accused her of orchestrating the entire scandal for personal gain. Rachel slammed her laptop shut one night in frustration. "It's all lies. Amara." "How can they twist everything?" Amara touched her shoulder gently. "Because power never surrenders quietly. They will fight until their last breath. But so will we." Then came the personal blow. Isaiah burst into her office with panic in his eyes. Mom's condition worsened. The doctors say the stress and all the media attention aren't helping. They think she needs peace away from all this. Amara's heart clenched. She had tried to shield her mother from the chaos, but somehow the cameras had found their way to the hospital doors. Protesters shouted outside, some supporting Amara, others blaming her for Sterling Luck's fall. That evening, Amara sat by her mother's bedside. The room was dim, the steady beeping of monitors filling the silence. Her mother's frail hand squeezed hers. "Baby girl," her mother whispered, voice weak but steady. "Don't you let them scare you. You've carried yourself with dignity. That's what matters, even if it costs you everything." Tears blurred Amara's vision. "Mama, I don't want to lose you to this fight." Her mother smiled faintly. "If my time comes, let it find me proud of my daughter." Amara kissed her hand, swallowing her grief, and silently vowed to finish the battle for her family and for everyone who had ever been mocked, dismissed, or silenced. Days later, Amara was invited to testify again, this time before an international tribunal on corporate ethics. The hearing streamed live across continents. Millions tuned in. When she walked into the chamber, she carried not just her story, but folders of evidence gathered by her reform counsel. She began calmly, but with conviction. Discrimination thrives when it hides behind luxury. Corruption thrives when it hides behind respectability. I faced both in a showroom filled with chandeliers and marble. What I experienced was not an isolated insult. It was the mask slipping off a global problem. Screens across the world lit up with her words. In Nairobi, students watched in a crowded classroom. In Detroit, a church live-streamed her testimony. In Seoul, a group of young activists projected her speech on a city wall. She presented every detail: the fraudulent contracts, the biased sales practices, the attempts to silence her. When she concluded, the room fell into a heavy silence, broken by thunderous applause. Beaumont, however, refused to bow. In a desperate televised interview, he painted himself as the victim of a vendetta. "Ms." Johnson exaggerated. "She seeks to destroy Sterling Luck for her own gain," he insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. But the public was no longer fooled. Journalists cross-checked his claims with leaked records. Witnesses came forward. Even David Johnson, the reluctant security guard from that first humiliating day, appeared on national TV. "I watched it with my own eyes," David said, voice shaking but firm. "I was told to escort a paying customer out because of how she looked. That was wrong. Ms. Johnson stood tall when I didn't, and I won't stay silent anymore. His testimony went viral. The tide turned permanently, yet victory carried costs. On the night regulators announced Sterling Lux's board would resign en masse. Amara's phone buzzed. Isaiah's voice cracked through the line. "She's gone! Amara!" Mama passed peacefully in her sleep. The world blurred. Applause. Headlines. Congratulations, all of it faded. She sank to the floor of her office, the grief hollowing her chest. For all her triumph, she couldn't outrun the pain of personal loss. Rachel and Carla rushed to her side, holding her as she wept. No speeches, no cameras, just human sorrow. For 3 days, Amara disappeared from public view. When she reemerged, it was at her mother's memorial. She stood at the pulpit, voice trembling but resolute. "My mother taught me that dignity is not a luxury, it is a birthright." She lived with quiet strength, and she left this world reminding me that justice is worth the cost. I will keep fighting, not just for her memory, but for everyone who has been told they don't belong. The congregation rose in a standing ovation, tears streaming down countless faces. In the weeks that followed, reforms accelerated. Sterling Lux dissolved its corrupt leadership and placed Amara's Reform Council at the helm of restructuring. Lawsuits turned into settlements, with millions directed into community programs for underrepresented entrepreneurs. But what struck Amara most were the letters that poured in thousands from across the country. A retired teacher in Chicago wrote, "I walked into a bank once, and they treated me like dirt. Watching you stand tall gave me healing, a teenager in Oakland. When they mocked you, I saw my own struggles. You gave me courage to walk into my classroom with my head high. Even a former Sterling Lux employee, I was part of the system that failed you. Seeing you speak broke something in me. I want to do better now." Each word reminded her that the fight was bigger than luxury cars or corporate scandals. It was about dignity, about the unshakable worth inside every person. One evening, sitting alone in her Atlanta office, Amara opened her laptop to draft a public letter. Her fingers hovered over the keys, then began to type. True luxury is not found in marble showrooms or expensive cars. It is found in respect, in justice, in the simple act of seeing each other as human. To everyone who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, I see you. Keep standing, keep believing, because the world is watching, and your story matters. She clicked post. Within minutes, the message flooded across social media, shared by millions. The world was watching. And this time, they were watching with hope. The months that followed were a blur of rebuilding. Sterling Lux, once a towering symbol of excess, now carried a new face, one that bore Amara Johnson's imprint. Though she had no desire to sit in Beaumont's old chair, her Reform Council shaped every major decision. Marble showrooms reopened, but with redesigned spaces that emphasized transparency and accessibility. No more velvet ropes separating clients based on assumptions. No more coded language favoring the wealthy-looking. Sales staff were retrained, not just to sell, but to serve with dignity. The showroom where it all began, the one where Amara was mocked, was transformed into a flagship center for equitable commerce. On the wall where luxury ads once gleamed, a new inscription appeared. Respect is the only luxury that matters. Amara stood quietly at its unveiling ceremony, a scarf draped around her shoulders, the applause of the crowd rising like a tide. But even amid progress, she still felt the ache of her mother's absence. Every victory was tinged with bittersweetness. Her evenings became quieter. After long days of meetings with regulators, lawyers, and community leaders, she often sat on her porch in Atlanta with Isaiah, sharing coffee as the sun set. "You know, sis," Isaiah said one evening, staring at the horizon, "Mom would be proud. She'd say you carried the fight farther than she ever dreamed." Amara smiled softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I carried it too far. The cost feels heavy." Isaiah shook his head. "Heavy, yes, but worth it. You didn't just win for yourself. You changed how people see what's possible." The real change became visible not in headlines, but in people. Rachel, once the quiet receptionist, now traveled across the country as an advocate for workplace equity. She spoke at universities, churches, even union halls, her voice steady, her presence electric. Carla guided the new Sterling Lux communications team, ensuring transparency replaced spin. Under her leadership, press releases carried accountability rather than empty apologies. Even David Johnson, the timid security guard who had once looked away, now worked as a community liaison, helping businesses build fairer practices. "Speaking up cost me fear," he admitted during a town hall. "But silence would have cost me my soul." For Amara, the greatest surprise came from the letters and stories that continued to arrive daily. One stood out, a handwritten note from a teenager in Birmingham. "They told me I didn't belong in honors classes because of how I look. Then I watched your video. I decided to stay. Last week, I won first place in the science fair. Thank you." She held the letter against her chest, her throat tightening. This was why she endured the ripple effect of courage. 6 months later, Amara was invited to deliver the commencement speech at Howard University. She almost declined, unsure if her grief would allow her to speak with clarity. But Isaiah persuaded her. "Go," he said. "Those students need to hear the truth, not perfection, but truth." The auditorium overflowed with graduates in gowns, families cheering, cameras flashing. When Amara stepped to the podium, the room hushed. She began softly, her voice carrying both weight and warmth. "I was mocked in a showroom that sold cars most people could never afford. They thought mocking me would make me small. Instead, it made me see how big the problem was." A murmur rippled through the audience. "But here's what I've learned," she continued. "Dignity doesn't depend on a showroom, a paycheck, or a title. It lives in how we choose to treat one another. Luxury fades, marble cracks, but dignity, if we protect it, lasts forever." The graduates rose in applause, some wiping away tears. Cameras captured the moment, and once again her words traveled far beyond the auditorium. That evening, back at her hotel, Amara sat by the window, the city lights shimmering below. She allowed herself a rare moment of peace. For the first time in months, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Her phone buzzed with a message from Carla Tern on CNN. "They're running a special Amara Johnson and the new definition of luxury." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Not me," she whispered to herself, "but us. All of us." She closed the curtains, letting the city fade away, and whispered a quiet prayer to her mother. In the years that followed, the movement she sparked grew into something larger than even she had anticipated. Laws passed mandating bias audits for corporations. A coalition of businesses launched dignity certification programs. Other CEOs, once silent, began speaking out. And ordinary people, teachers, nurses, janitors, students carried her message into their own lives. True luxury, they echoed, was not in things but in respect. One final scene remains etched in memory. Amara walked again into that showroom years later, now filled with new faces, new energy. A young black couple stood at the counter, admiring a car, but hesitant. The salesman greeted them warmly, without judgment. handing them keys for a test drive. Amara lingered nearby, unseen, watching the exchange. She felt tears prick her eyes. Isaiah nudged her. "See, this is what you built," Amara whispered back. "No, this is what we built. Together." As the couple drove off, laughter echoing, she closed her eyes and felt her mother's presence in the room. The ache of loss softened, replaced by something steady and enduring. Hope. The world did not become perfect. Discrimination did not vanish. But because of one humiliating moment in a showroom and the refusal to stay silent, millions were reminded that dignity is not negotiable. Amara Johnson became more than a CEO. She became a symbol, not of power, but of possibility. And though she carried scars, she also carried hope. Because sometimes, being mocked is not the end of a story. It is the spark that begins a new one. The story of Amara Johnson teaches us that dignity is the one luxury no one can take away from us. Many of us, especially in later years of life, know the sting of being overlooked or dismissed. Amara's journey reminds us that respect is not tied to wealth, status, or appearance. It is a birthright. Her choice to respond with calm strength, rather than anger or silence, shows the power of restraint and principle. In every stage of life, we are faced with moments where we must decide whether to accept unfairness or to challenge it with grace. For older generations, this lesson resonates deeply. It calls us to remember our own battles, the times we had to stand up quietly yet firmly for what was right. The message is clear, no matter our age. We still have influence. We can still shape how the world treats us and how we treat others. Dignity, once lived out, inspires generations. It turns pain into healing and injustice into reform. Her story invites us to carry ourselves with honor and to leave behind a legacy of respect for those who follow. Thank you for spending your time with us and walking through this powerful journey. Stories like these remind us of the value of respect, courage, and dignity in everyday life. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep these stories alive and keep hope alive, too.